So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at the underwater version of the cover image. Going to jump into File, Open, and I'm going to go down to Chapter 18, Cover Image Underwater Finished. So you can see we kind of have this before and after here. We have our exterior version of the scene, and then we have our underwater scene. So a lot of these techniques, they were just used in the previous chapter, the underwater scene. And then we just kind of expanded out using some more techniques. So let's take a look at how this was built. So if I scroll all the way to the top here, I'm going to skip over this part. This is the same setup as before. So we just have our volumetrics being shuffled into their individual channels. We have our exterior mat that's being built here, just like that, and shuffled in. We have our lighting and our diffuse, and then I'm just dividing those to get access to our raw lighting pass. And then you can see we got some fireflies that are happening over here, and I just painted those out right there. I'm doing a bit of a grade to give it that blue feel. So right now it's feeling pretty warm. So I'm just putting a grade on there to kind of put it more in that bluish kind of world. So similar setup as we were doing before, we're just adding some grain onto that sand texture. So before and after, using that noise pattern and ST mapping that on. And instead of actually multiplying in, we're actually going to make some more tweaks here. So if I go down the tree a little bit more, you notice that we're actually adding a lot of texture here. So if this were an underwater scene, maybe there would be some vegetation happening here. And currently within our diffuse pass, it's just all rocks, just like this. So before and after here. So we're just adding the vegetation here on these rocks here. So to break that down, essentially what we're doing is we're grabbing this texture here and we're ST mapping it all over the scene, just like that. But what we're doing is we're actually taking the normals and we're creating a map based on this. So just on the top areas here is where we're going to actually see this. And then we're taking a little bit of the sand texture and adding a little bit on here too. We're not going to use all of it. We're actually going to use parts of the sand just to make it feel a little bit more random. And then if we put that over our original, we'll see this is over everything, and then this is using our matte, and then we're overing that onto our diffuse. So now just the vegetation is happening on the top part of the rocks. And bits and pieces here and there for the sand. And then I'm just taking the sand and I'm kind of darkening it a little bit, just like that. Maybe it's a little darker because it's wet. And then we're just multiplying that in over our lighting pass, just like that. And then we have our GI. So you see we got our GI, our diffuse, we're dividing that. We're grading it to get it in that bluish world. I'm just going to switch over to our lookup table so we're not getting so clamped in the highlights there. We got a diffuse underwater that we made before. We're multiplying that in. And just to get this feeling more like it's kind of like the light is falling off quicker, what I'm going to do is just add in that AO like that. So we're shuffling out the AO pass and really crunching it down like that, just so the GI just doesn't bounce as far. So maybe the light's kind of falling off quicker underneath the water, just like that. And then we're adding that into our scene, just like that. So we're getting some ambient lighting happening. And if you scroll down a little bit, we're adding in our reflection, just like that. So we're shuffling out our reflection, giving it a bit of a grade to get into that blue world. We're bumping up the exposure. You can see we're getting a lot of noise there, so I'm just degrading that, shuffling out our AO, and then just kind of multiplying the AO back over top of it too, so it's not so ambient lit. Then I'm just adding that in. So we're bringing in our specular, so that's before and after. So just shuffling that out and doing a similar technique where we're just adding the blue, multiplying it up, degraining it, and then bringing in our ambient occlusion and knocking that down a little bit so it doesn't bounce around so much. Then we're adding that into the scene. Then we have our caustics. So we're starting with our texture that we have here. This is the same setup that we went over in the previous chapters, so I'm just going to breathe through this. We're tiling it, and then we're adding some chromatic aberration there. So it's before and after the chromatic aberration. And then we're taking the point position pass and making some UVs there, so we can project from top down. And then when we ST map that on, you'll see we get it mapped all over our scene. So then we just need to make the lighting pass for this. So I have my AO here, I'm grading that down, and then I have my normals. I'm grading that down, and then I'm multiplying those in. So essentially, right now what we're seeing is an ambient source multiplied in with our normals. So just the top part of our normals. So you can see we're getting just the Y channel here. And we're grading that back, multiplied in, so it's kind of like an ambient light source that is just affecting the top parts of our scene, so we don't actually get these bottom parts showing up in our caustics. I'm just multiplying that up. I'm taking those caustics that we made before, and I'm multiplying those in, just like that. So now we got kind of like our raw lighting pass for our caustics. We're taking our diffuse texture and multiplying that in, so we get our texture information. Putting a grade on it to get in the blue world. Putting an exposure on it, and then we're adding that in. And you can see we're kind of affecting the rocks and the sand a little differently. So I'm just shuffling out that RGB map for the sand, and then grading down our caustics on this so they're not so dominant on those areas. And then to make our caustics not one consistent value overall, we kind of want them to be a little bit hotter maybe in these brighter areas. What we can do is take our lighting passes and use them for our raw lighting. And we'll take our lighting caustics and then multiply those into that lighting source. So we're taking that light select run element and using this to mask out our caustics, just like that. So then what we can do is multiply that into our texture and then really grade that up to make these areas a lot hotter. And then I'm just adding that in, just like that. So the actual brighter parts of the image where the actual light's hitting is we see the caustics are a lot brighter, which kind of makes it a little bit more believable. So we have our volumetrics, shuffling them out, putting the grain on there, a grade to knock some blue in there, gaining it up. Here we're just bringing back the background a little bit, and then you can see we're kind of creating this mask to kind of create maybe this little top-down effect where it's bright at the top, dark at the bottom. So it kind of feels like the light's coming from top, and then as it goes down in the background, it kind of gets darker. So that's before and after. So now we have our volumetrics. So we have our volumetrics pass. I'm shuffling out the red channel to get our hero volumetrics there. I'm grading them just like that. Knocking the background back so it's not so dominant. And then we're adding a little bit of texture in there. Not a lot, just a little bit. Using these textures and kind of knocking that back. And then I'm just doing a couple different exposures for this. So we have 1, like that, 2, and 3. So it's kind of creating this kind of like a light wrap effect. So we got that, and that. So a little bit of a light wrap going on. Then we have our foreground volumetrics, so before and after. Just like that. So we're shuffling out the foreground volumetrics, giving some blue in there, adding a little bit of texture, grading that back, and then doing one for a light wrap, and then one for the base volumetrics, just like that. And now we have some more foreground volumetrics. So if I do it before and after, you can kind of just see we're just kind of creating some atmosphere here to separate out this rock. Currently, there's not a lot of information separating this foreground background. So that's just a nice little way to kind of make that silhouette pop a little bit more. And then we're baking in our LUT. So I'm going to switch over to sRGB and turn off our input process, just like that. And you can see we got some more light wrapping going. So this is before, after. So we're just kind of creating this light wrap effect that's happening right around the edge. So same technique as we did in the last lesson. We're taking our exterior matte, blurring that or multiplying that in over across our current beauty. Blurring that out just like this. Grading that up, and then taking our exterior matte, inverting it, and using that as a mask for this effect. And then we're kind of getting that halo effect again. It's kind of looking like some aliasing is happening here. So we'll just take the edge blur and blur that out to kind of soften that up. Next up, we're adding our air bubbles. So we got this air bubbles pass. This is coming from Houdini. And then what we're going to do is we're going to layer this all over our scene. So this is after or before, and then this is after. So you can see we got 1, 2, 3, 4 different air pockets. And then what I'm doing is I'm just kind of like scaling this and kind of shifting this in horizontal. So I'm kind of randomizing this up a bit. So you can see I'm actually scaling this in -1, so we're kind of randomizing that. So you can see there's one. And how I'm matting this in here, so if we take a look at this, what I'm doing is I'm taking the point position camera pass and creating a matte based on depth. So if we look at the alpha, we're actually creating a matte for this rock right here so that the bubbles can kind of just sit in this one little space, just like that. So we got those air bubbles. We got another one right back here. Another one right there. Another one. And then the final one right there. Next up, we got our dusty floaty bits. So we got this render coming from Houdini. If we gain this up, we can see what's happening here. The red channel, we got these particles. In the green channel, we got kind of this volumetric dust. And if I do a before and after of this, so before, after, you can see we're creating a lot of atmosphere using those passes. So we got some that are adding in the midground, and then some that are adding some depth in the foreground. So you can see as they get closer, they get more out of focus, like that. Right there as well. And then the final one's right there. So before and after. You can see all these ones in the foreground right there as well. Cool. And then we have our color grade. So we'll go before and after. So it's just kind of like taking away some blues and getting some greens in there. And then we have our crop. So we're adding that crop here just for the composition. And then we're adding a little bit of lens distortion in there. And then the last little bit, what we're doing is adding some film grain. So we have RGB matte, and what we're doing is based on these luminance values, we are shuffling in 2 different grain values. So we have one grain that's set up to be really, really high, and one set up to be really, really low. So the really, really low grain values go into the brighter areas, and then the darker areas, it's going to kind of simulate that darker film grain. So less light, more grain. So we can see in the brighter areas, we don't get nearly as much grain as the darker areas. So that is it. You can see I have my mirror node down here. Whenever I need to have a new perspective on this, I can just flip that and get a new perspective. Check out, see if I can see any errors happening. And that's that. So thank you all for sticking through it and making it to the end. I strongly encourage you guys to take these last two renders and kind of play around with them, come up with your own results, dissect what I have more in depth, and kind of rebuild it your own way and see what you can come up with. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the entire training series. I hope you guys got a lot of value out of it. If you come up with any renders, I would definitely love to check that out, so feel free to send them my way. But until then, I will see you guys in the next one.